Welcome to the Shmoo Daddy streaming experience. I'm your host as per usual, Shmoo Daddy. If it's the first time you're watching the stream, the VOD, or the video on YouTube, I'm a monthly Hearthstone Wild Legend player who would typically hit Legend first of the month and after that goof off. And when I goof off, I play your decks. But tonight, what I'd like to do is, before I get into my usual stream, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about budget decks, because I feel like I haven't touched on budget decks in Wild in a bit. And I've had a lot of people, a lot of people, reach out to me from across the format ladder and say, hey, I'm a standard player, I'm bored of standard, I'm really interested in seeing what's going on in Wild. And a lot of times people feel like there's a barrier to entry for Wild because the card library is so huge and it's so much dust and it's going to be so expensive, and that's really a myth. If you want to be competitive in Wild, it actually costs very, very little dust. If you want to meme in Wild or play a variety, that's when you're probably going to have to make an investment over a long term. Especially if you want to play something like a Reno deck, especially if you want to play something like Hostage Mage, decks that require a lot of legendaries. But some of the most effective decks that I play don't have any of that. In fact, there might be one or two decks that I showcase tonight that maybe have no legendaries or have one or two legendaries. And even those might be flex. So first off, I want to start with like what exactly constitutes the budget, and it's hard to say. So this meta is a lot less budget friendly than some of our previous metas. Some of our previous metas had things like Radiant Elemental, enabling a lot of commons and rares to be essentially just game winning. For example, Horror Priest, or Miracle Priest as it used to be called, used to be like a cool 3,200 dust. Treant Druid used to be like 1,800 dust. Well, sometimes I think if you counted it up, it was less than a legendary or just a little bit more than a legendary. Those cards have been hit hard by funnel cake nerfs, as well as in the Radiant's case, obviously Radiant Elemental's nerf. So Wild is less budget friendly than it used to be, but I think there are still some bargains if you know where to look. So the first place that I would look, I'm high on this deck as far as something interesting to play. That's cool. KVLT's version of Miracle Rogue. Now, the expensive cards. What I'm looking for here is not just legendaries and whether or not those legendaries are flex, but also how many epics there are. You know, a long time ago, I would be suggesting Shadow Priest as a great budget deck to include, but the reality is that Shadow Priest has so many epics in it now, and that's ignoring the legendaries that you can throw in as well, that I've showcased before, that it's really getting more and more expensive, and really, you know, now it's topping up around like 10k dust. No one has 10k dust lying around. Do some people maybe have most of the cards and are willing to spend, 3,200 dust? Maybe. So I'm going to give you some options. I'm going to see what you have. What I do like about this deck, though, is it has a lot of things from standard and a lot of things in core that we already have. You don't have to craft preps. We already have the core version of those. You don't have to craft Shadow Steps. We have the core version of those. If you're playing any Cycle Rogue in Standard, odds are you have Breakdance already, so like that's good. Space Rock Collector is a common. It's a new card, but it's a great enabler for this deck. You already have Dubious Purchase, so you probably have some inkling on how you're supposed to play this deck, but if you don't, I'm going to make sure I include with each deck a video that has at least some sample footage of me playing it. The flex parts in this, the last card is always Zephrys the Great. For me, I can't play this deck without Zephrys. I have lots of people with very heated opinions about what the last card should be, and they say Zephrys sucks, and they hate Zeph, blah, 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 blah. I think adding Zeph as a 30th card adds another dimension to the deck. I win plenty of games that I have no business winning because I know how to use Zephrys the Great. A lot of times, the people that I find are super resistant to putting Zeph into their Miracle Rogue deck are people who can't use Zeph. So if you want to learn how to use Zeph, the best suggestions I have are if you're looking for something very specific like Flare, make sure you're clearing off the opponent's board, make sure you're showing lethal, make sure that the only option that you're giving Zeph is either 4 mana or 1 mana, 4 mana in a board space being you might get SI Infiltrator, which will destroy a secret, which will hopefully be Ice Block, or 1 mana, forcing Zeph to look at Flare. If you give him too much mana, Zeph will pick an option. He's trying to use up all your mana first and foremost. If you pick up too much mana, Zeph won't see your options. If you want, you got some sneaky lethals where you can play Zeph, give a giant Wind Fury, Shadow Step Zeph, play a coin, play Zeph again. He'll give you, once you give the giant Wind Fury, you can then cold blood it. So now it'll have Wind Fury and Cold Blood, which is a nasty way to go find lethal. You can use Zeph to find ways to find silences to unfreeze your giants. There's a lot of ways that you can use Zeph that I think people don't always recognize and know the lines. So it's important for you to at least attempt to learn those things. But if you really hate him, you can always sub in like a Cult Neophyte. I think those are in core right now. I don't know, Neophytes? Are Neophytes in core? You could sub in a Cult Neophyte. I don't like Astalor. That seems like the dumb, but you could. Speaker Stomper, it's fine. Some people do Fizzle, whatever. But Neophyte's free. So, like, if you don't have Zeph, just use Neophyte. Deck gets a lot cheaper from there. That's 7,800, and I don't know if it's counting the stuff that's in core as well. I think it's counting up the total list in total. If you have to craft Shadow Demise, I mean, it's a forever rogue card. There's never going to be a meta. This isn't good until like Rogue stops playing spells. I don't know. Recrafting Passage, Secret Passage kind of hurts, but it's one of the more important cards in the deck. All right. So this is like a start. This is like a first stop. This is probably the most stretchy. You have to craft Arcane Giants too. These get easier and easier to make 0. This is like my stretch as far as like budget goes, but it came to mind because what if you don't play Zephyrus? This number gets knocked down quite a bit. All right. The next deck that typically has historically been something that I would say is a good budget deck is Fatigue DH. This is a modern list. This last card that's a Speaker Stomper. Some people play Zeph. That doesn't look very good. Some people play like Double Jump. I don't particularly like Double Jump, but it's cheap. Like, you could stick in kind of anything in this particular slot. The quest line is probably going to be very, very good for a very long time until it gets nerfed. I don't see it getting nerfed anytime in the future, but the first 2 stages are just absolutely disgusting mana cheat. And so we're probably going to keep using this in Wild for a long time. Patches the Pilot, you might already have if you are a Swarm Shaman enjoyer. And if you're, an attack DH enjoyer, you're definitely using around a Thrill Seeker. So there's a good chance you already have a fair amount of this deck crafted if you are, in fact, a standard enjoyer. The philosophies are core. Can't do without 2 of them. I'm sorry. Other than that, I mean, everything else is all commons and rares and giga super cheap. Again, aside from the legendaries. So, cheap, affordable list. Not great if you see a bunch of aggro, but if you see a bunch of greed piles, this is very, very good. And this can scam aggro. So keep an eye on this if you're looking for a budget option that's a little bit more combo-y. I love this Garrote Rogue. I love this Garrote Rogue so much. Once again, we're crafting Passage, and we have Garrote. And yes, I'm saying you need to craft Patches. Patches, I think, is a very, very good craft. Not only is he a very, very good craft, but he's an extra draw off of Boat. And yes, that extra draw is absolutely worth it, though you're going to feel like an asshole every time you draw him. Deck plays very differently now that we have Ethereal Oracles instead of Street Tricksters as our spell damage source. The fact that you can step the Ethereal Oracles and then guarantee that you draw Garrotes, and also take advantage of the fact that there's the mechanic that if you draw a cast from drawn spell, you'll draw again. And you can draw a non-spell card, that means, with Ethereal Oracle. Sometimes you just tempo out the Garrotes and just use Oracle as a draw engine through the deck. It makes it much less reliant on Boat, and I really love this deck a lot. It's a lot of fun to play, and it's pretty complicated. I would absolutely play it with a deck tracker. It's a little tricky to learn without a deck tracker. With a deck tracker, this thing can be a lot of fun. Regardless, at 6960 for a lot of like core legendaries, and again, I don't know if that's also counting the preparations. I got these dust totals from Donkey. I don't know if they're taking that off. This is going to be pretty affordable. Mostly commons, the odd rare sprinkled in. The heavy part being a couple of epics, Again, Garrote's probably going to be good for a long time in Wild. Passage, still necessary. We cut it in some decks, but in a deck like this, it's still very good, especially because you're always prepping it as best you can. Preps are in core. Cool option. I'll make sure I include a video with that. Barnes Druid needs no introduction. I've brought this deck to Legend twice now. I don't think I'm going to make it 3 times in a row, mostly out of boredom more than anything else. It's still very effective. I played a couple more games of Wild to kind of shore up my Wild rank. Let's see where I'm at. Yeah, I'm going to camp at about 470 and say that that's probably good enough. If it's not good enough, oh well. But I'm going to be probably pretty close to 11x. The epics are Ultimate Infestation. Right now, this is actually seeing play in 2 decks that involve Ysayle. One in Malygos Druid, which is very, very good. Arguably better than this deck, though I think this deck's faster than Malygos Druid. It's just a little bit more prone to... It's a little bit more prone to being disrupted. And a fast start aggro is tough to survive, but not impossible. I enjoy a version that has 1 Cold Tooth Mine, 1 Innervate, which is a trick I snagged from Oddlaw. A lot of times he's using Cold Tooth Mine to go get Innervate as a coin for when you don't have the coin, or just as an extra coin. It does help you pop off a turn sooner. When in doubt, Cold Tooth Mine always gets you Ultimate Infestation, so that you could cycle a little bit heavier. Pretty affordable deck. Barnes you can get from an adventure. So if you use the gold to buy the adventure, you can get that and a bunch of other cards. Ysayle looks like a very good craft right now until she's not a good craft and gets nerfed, but I don't see that happening in the near future. So this deck, getting cheaper. That's 6,200 now. Bless Priest. I gave Marshy this deck as a Martian. This deck as a, he's like, I don't know what to play, but I want fast games. And I said, well, Maxie really likes this deck, and every time I play it, I win. So I sent him this deck. Ignore the 2 legendaries at the bottom of the list. I think you could do without Samuro. In fact, Samuro has some anti-synergy with Orbital Halo that's a little bit embarrassing if you've ever done that for once. And Amathul is just a good card. It's just like these are just like your top end, and this is a board clear to kind of swing back the board. You don't really need those 2. In theory, you could play Ethereal Oracle in here in these 2 slots instead if you were really hard up. I don't necessarily suggest that, but it's more cycle for a deck that's really reliant on spells. I also don't fucking hate it. So you could do that. And if you're doing that, then this 6,080 dust turns into something more along the lines of like what? 2,800? That's pretty good. Very fast deck. Very good into board-based aggro. Also puts on a lot of pressure against stuff that isn't fighting for the board. So, like, just overall, I think good deck. It is a little hard to pilot, so keep an eye out when Marshy comes out with his Blessed Priest video. I'll make sure I link that in the description so that you see an example of how it's played, but also I'll include a video of me playing this deck. Usually it's weaved in with some other stuff, and usually my opponent's dying on like turn 3, turn 4. It's pretty good. Dude, you haven't lived until you've slapped Orbital Halo on a Crab Rider. Turn 1, 3/5 Wind Fury Rush Divine Shield is kind of disgusting with the coin. Okay, Nature Shaman. I'm gonna admit something. I think this deck is a sleeper. I think this deck is really good, and I see almost nobody play it. And I forget who submitted this, but every time I play this deck, whether it's to go beat the Lich King, to go get my Arthas portrait, whether it's randomly on stream, somebody goes, oh, give me a Nature Shaman, and then I just sort of like queue it up. My opponents die anywhere from turns 4 to 6, and usually by a shitload of damage. So, like, I think it's underplayed. I think it's pretty good. The funniest thing that we do in Wild with Ethereal Oracle, for my money, is instead of using Shadow Step, we reincarnate it. So imagine if the turn before I have played, either gotten a Radiance of Ashara to stick, or I've played Flash of Lightning, and then I drop the Ethereal Oracle. Essentially, for free, I'm playing my 1-mana nature spells, and then also for free, I'm killing it and bringing it back with spell damage to do more bullshit. Deck is really cool, very miracle-y. You can get a little lost in the weeds with the turns. I have never finished the quest and made use of it, to my knowledge, for what I remember. Most of the time, I am using the quest for that first stage, just unlocking your mana crystals, but also the free 3/3 is not insignificant when it comes to damage on the bioluminescence. Now, I realize there's a couple of epics in here. You need an overdraft. You need a bioluminescence. You might not own Radiance of Ashara. You might have to recraft the Flash of Lightnings. Deck is still pretty cheap at like 6K. And Command the Elements goes in and out of meta play based off of how much support it has. It's a couple of cards away from getting, it's always a couple of cards away from getting a lot of support and being like, oh man, is this deck busted? I think this deck is very playable, and I think it's actually probably just fine in aggro and stuff, because you don't always have to burst down your opponent. Sometimes you just go sort of tokeny and just sort of take them that way. And sometimes you can discover some board buffs and stuff and go from there. So I've had a lot of success with this deck. I think this deck is underplayed. But the king of the hill, the queen of the crop, I don't know, the choice deck is Libram Paladin. Now I notice I called this Lanessa, but this version, which is the most popular on Donkey, is a whopping 1,820 dust. 1,820 dust for a deck with a high amount of synergy that will kick absolute ass. The Crusader's Aura, is that still core? Or did they take that out of core? Still in core. Nutty. So, you don't even have to pay anything for that epic. Everything else is just dirt cheap. Cards that suck that you could obviously upgrade upon. A lot of people are starting to cycle back to 1 Myrmidon. I don't totally love it, but whatever. I guess you could. We're not running Libram of Divinity. Where are you? Libram of Divinity. Where are you? This version isn't running Libram of Divinity. I think that's a bad idea. I think this should go in. I think this should easily go in over Adaptation. Double Blessing of Wisdom is a little bit suspect. These spells are always suspect, but I like versions that include them. I think you can always put in Lanessa. Lanessa, I think, is awesome. Crusader's Aura is a great card, but it's not necessarily always in this deck. I think you could run it in this deck. I think the 6-mana, especially with the 6-mana Libram, that people, I guess, keep cutting because they're just like, it's bad. It's never 0. They never have Rush. They don't need to have Rush. You just chuck the fuckers out there and they stick around, and then you can Crusader Aura them down, but whatever. The 6-mana Libram can go in there. I don't know how to build Libram Paladin. There's like a million ways you can build Libram Paladin, and it kind of works, and I think all of them work. I think all of them are fine. I've tried to fight, philosophical battles about whether or not we go pure with the Purator or we include instrument tech. I think it all freaking works. So whatever you have a budget for, check out a bunch of Libram lists. Kind of try out all the pieces that you got. And whichever list you like the most, go with it. But if you have none of the flex pieces and you just need a base list to start with, this is a fantastic one. This is dirt cheap. This will absolutely win you games. You'll have a lot of fun, but there are definitely places where you can still do some clear upgrades. So let's see. I have given you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 budget decks that you can look at and play in our wild format. That won't break the bank. That will get your foot in the door. That you'll be able to enjoy. So if you enjoyed this content, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing on YouTube. And I hope if you're wild curious, you try Wild out.